All right. Well, I think we're going. Did you get the notification that
Yep.
we're going? Okay, perfect. All right. So, welcome everyone to our monthly speaker series for Science on the Sound. My name is Emily Bjornskard. I am the lead aquarist here at the Mass Center, and here today and every day is Aeriel Wauhob, our community engagement coordinator for the Mass Center as well, and she will be discussing the creepy crawlies of the Salish Sea to start off spooky season here at the mast. So I will let you just take it away, Ariel.
Awesome. So if you know me, you know Halloween in October is kind of my favorite time of year. And currently, the Mass Center Aquarium is slowly turning into that spooky season. And one of the things that we love to talk about here are the creepy crawlies of the Salish Sea, specifically the animals that have supernatural powers, if you will. So I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite creepy crawlies of the Salish Sea. They are from Puget Sound. They might not be creepy to you. They might not be crawly based on their locomotion, but they definitely have supernatural powers to them. So I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get started. All right. So to start us off at number 10, to me, is crabs. And for some people, you know that they shed their exoskeleton. So let's quickly just talk about skeletons in general. So some of us, like humans, we have our skeleton on the inside of our body. Some animals have their skeleton on the outside of their body, like crabs. And then some animals just don't really have a skeletal structure. But crabs, in my mind, are a little creepy. They definitely crawl or scuttle. So crabs will molt or shed their exoskeleton a few times a year, depending on where they're at in their life stages. And so in these photos, you can see we've got a few different crabs here. This one is a graceful crab who has decided to hide under the sand. They will do this sometimes after they molt, whether it's under the sand or rocks, because their body is kind of soft and squishy. So they go from this really hard outer shell to growing a new exoskeleton underneath that old exoskeleton. And so it's kind of folded up and a little bit malleable. And so when they do pop out of their old exoskeleton, they literally split the back end and where their carapace meets their tail and they pop out, which is kind of creepy all on its own. So they will hide themselves until they harden, and then they can be out and about, and their exoskeleton will protect them from predators. Also, with this, if you look to the picture on the right, that's what an exoskeleton looks like in the aftermath. So just a bunch of jumbled little pieces where the legs have come out, the carapace or the back piece has popped off. And the only thing that you will find left in those molts are the gill coverings, which is really gross that they kind of like leave their shedded gills behind in their old clothes. So if you go to the beach to figure out if you have a crab molt or not, is you pick up that crab, and if the back piece lifts really easily and you just see gills left, then you have a molt. If it doesn't lift and it's stinky, you just have a dead crab. But crabs in general are creepy and crawly, so they scuttle on the ground. They use camouflage to hide, so you might be walking right next to one and not know that. And one of mine is at the bottom left here, a crab that we used to have inside our aquarium is a hairy lithoid. And you can see those amazing spines on the outside of that crab's exoskeleton. And that helps for her to blend in with algae and hydroids, but also for algae and hydroids to kind of grab onto her and start growing. So they have really good camouflage where they'll be hiding on the pilings or in eelgrass beds, and you just won't even know that they're there. Also, crabs are arthropods, which means they're closely related to bugs. So if you don't like bugs, you might not like crabs, which are the bugs of the sea. All right, moving on to number 9, chitons. So chitons are super cool. They're a mollusk, so a snail. But these ones have some very unique features to them. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and we'll get into that here with my next slide. So some of my slides will play videos, and I'll talk about what happens in those videos, but this wadded up ball of what looks like gum is kind of why this animal got its name. It's called a gumboot chitin. They're roughly the size of a football, and the internal structure, their skeleton, is this right here at the bottom, those plates. So just like a snail, they have the harder outer shell to them. And these plates are individual plates that allow them to bend and roll up. So unlike land snails or aquatic snails that have to pull themselves inside the shell, these ones will roll their shell up around them. I joke that these are kind of like roly-polies of the sea. They roll up to protect that soft belly that's underneath them. These animals have not really evolved for quite a long time. They're one of the only animals to produce iron ore in their body. And it's used for something that you wouldn't really think about. It's not for that shell. So I'm going to play this video right here, and you can see this cool metallic structure that kind of rolls up. And so if you watch it again, you can see these little metal, almost like zipper, click together. So these animals, especially the gumboot chitin, if you're out on the beach and you're using a metal detector to find, lost pennies, jewelry, whatever, you can actually detect them because of the metal that's in their teeth. So this is called a radula, which is a rasping or scraping tongue-like structure. And so that iron ore is at the base of their teeth. So if you ever listen to Nelly and Grills, this one literally has a metal grill, and it's to protect those teeth from really eroding away because these animals are constantly scraping hard surfaces. They're scraping algae off of rocks and other like man-made structures. And so to protect them, that iron keeps them in their radula. So super cool to see. This one is off of the gumboot chitin, which we do have one here at the Mass Center Aquarium. So if you want to come see these giant prehistoric snails with metal teeth, they're really awesome to see in person. All right. So number 8 is sea stars. Some people might be like, oh, sea stars aren't creepy or crawly. Well, you might not know all of the different sea stars that are out there. We have one that is really cool that kind of has that Halloween October theme, and that's this lovely one in the center that has that patchwork to it. That here is called a slime star, and that center is where that slime oozes out of them. And this slime is very sticky and really hard to get off, and especially for predators trying to eat it, it just gets a mouthful of slime, and so this star can escape from it. So slime stars, super cool animals that we have here in Puget Sound, but we also have some other very unique looking sea stars. So below the slime star at the bottom here are feather stars. We have common feather stars here in Puget Sound, and they have arms that have feather-like structures that they wave in the water to swim. So they'll kind of just paddle through the water and then settle down, where they use kind of like these little hooks to hold onto a substrate as they're feeding, which if you've ever seen them swim can be very spooky or beautiful or both. So feather stars, super cool animals that don't really look like a sea star. Another sea star that doesn't look like a traditional sea star is in the bottom left corner here. This is called a basket star. They kind of look like a little tree underwater. And if you've ever had nightmares of being, swallowed up by a tree, that's what these do to their prey alive. So they will grab with those arms, those feeding arms, and hold onto the animal and slowly knot it up so the animal can't escape. And then they pull it tightly to their mouth, where they then slowly digest that animal, usually alive. So kind of scary. And then in the upper left corner here are some sea stars that get really big. So if you've ever been on the beaches around here, You might have seen, some small stars, roughly hand size, maybe, 6 to 7 inches. But we do have some sea stars that get extremely big. So you can see right here in the center, my hand is up against what is called a giant pink sea star or a short spine pink sea star. And ours is lovingly referred to as Patrick around here, but they get really, really big. And big sea stars can move really fast. So the one below it here with the multiple arms is called a sunflower sea star. You might have heard about them very recently because of sea star wasting disease. Unfortunately, these are the ones that really got hit with that disease and are like 99% extinct in their regional habitat here in Puget Sound. But this one was up at the Padilla Bay Estuary Reserve, which is super awesome that they still have one, but you can see how big they are. Also, you can see how it has many more arms than a traditional star that we see around here. And so if you don't know sea star anatomy, their eyes are at the tips of their hands. And so if you have 5 arms, you have 5 eyes. But if you have 40 arms, you have 40 eyes, which is really cool, but also kind of scary that they just have all of these eyes that you can see. Also with sea stars, they have a kind of a nervous system that runs through each one of the arms. So each one of the arms is in control. And so they're constantly fighting with who gets to drive the body at that point. And so if you can imagine, again, 5 arms, kind of 5 brains, 5 personalities trying to dictate where you're going, which is really awesome. Also with stars, they can regrow or have regenerative properties. So you can see in the center here, we have one star that has 4 arms. So it's missing one of the 5. This is a mottled star here. And so it'll heal it. And then like this little star at the bottom here that skipped leg day, it will slowly regrow those arms back. Sometimes they will tend to catch up to the size that they once were, but sometimes they'll stay just a little bit shorter or a little bit smaller than the rest, which that is a good thing to have, especially if a predator is trying to come after you. They can chomp off an arm and the rest of you can run away, and you can regrow that body part again. Some other really cool features with our stars, they have their gills, they're called skin gills, that can protrude out of their skin so they can get more oxygen. So in this upper right corner here, you can see that kind of like squiggly all over this leather star. Those are the skin gills to it. And so if you've ever seen a sea star get fuzzy, it is trying to get more oxygen by pushing out those gills. And then down here in this video, you can see the underside of the leather star and its tube feet. So the feet are what hold that animal onto things. You can really see those suction cups really pulling and holding on. But they also do some other weird things like smell. So these sea stars are ferocious predators. They're really fast, nicknamed the cheetahs of the sea. The sunflower star there can move its entire body length in 1 minute. And so it'll chase down its food in the intertidal zone. And so these 2 feet act like a conveyor belt moving them, but also smelling the path for that food. Once they get to that food, they suction cup. Usually their food of choice is bivalve. So we're talking clams or scallops. And so they need to pry that apart because they can't get to that inner meat. And so those 2 feet pull that outer shell out. And then another really cool thing that they've evolved to do is they protrude their stomach out of their body and into that bivalve to liquefy it into a soup, slurp that down, and then use their second stomach to actually digest it. So, recap. Imagine if you're going to sit down and eat dinner. You need to throw your stomach up onto your plate, make it into a delicious soup, slurp that down, and then your second stomach that's inside your body actually gets the nutrients from it. Which sounds really gross, but for these, it helps them get to that food that is protected by a hard outer shell. And not only are these 2 feet really cool because they smell, they move, but they use water to move these feet. So sea stars have a hydrovascular system, so pumping their muscles is water. And so if you look back up to the skin gill picture, you can see this tiny little spot on that sea star. It's called a madrepore. It's basically a water valve that allows water to get in and out of the body so that it can move its muscles, meaning sea stars can live out of water for a short period of time. So during low tide, when the water is out off the shoreline and sea stars are hiding underneath rocks out of the sun, they're okay. They've got that sieve that can keep the water in them. That's why they're not moving, so they can conserve that water, and they're waiting for that tide to come back in. But also, if you see a sun star or a sea star on the beach baking in the sun, it could potentially be completely dehydrated. And so it just needs water to kind of inflate again and start moving. So really cool features, 2 stomachs, multiple eyes, hydrovascular system. Sea stars are really a unique creature. All right, number 7, nudibranchs. And if you know me, my favorite sea creature is a opalescent nudibranch. Nudibranch means naked gills because these sea slugs have their gills on the outside of their body. And they come in a variety of shapes, sizes, and colors. So here we've got our leopardor that has these nice little leopard spot patterns, and its gills are this little ruffle on its butt here. We've got our orange tip here, and then we have a frosted or white lines Dorona. So some do come really big. I call this one the sweet potato of the sea because they're about the size of a sweet potato here. Some can get about a foot long and can free swim, which is pretty cool. Otherwise, most of them tend to stay pretty small, up to 2 inches. This is one of my favorites. I know it's called a thick horn around here, but I grew up knowing them as opalescent nudibranchs, so I'm going to stick with that one. These ones are super cool because they will eat the stinging tentacles off of Cnidaria, and they will stick them through their own skin and use them as armor. So if something else tries to bite this soft-bodied slug, it'll get zapped based off of the food that it's eating. And then this little green one down at the bottom is a sea hare, and it's a sap sucker. And so what it does is it sucks out the chlorophyll from the algae that it's eating, and it'll put it into its skin where it can still photosynthesize. So it'll get sugars from that algae that is now in its body, and is what it gives this animal its green hue. We've got a sea lemon up here. Some say that they smell like lemon. And so that's one of their defense mechanisms. Apparently fish don't like the smell of lemon. Another animal that smells kind of fruity are these down here. These are called hooded nudibranchs or lion's mane nudibranchs. And right now you can see them feeding. Those tiny little orange dots are brine shrimp. And so they take this massive oral hood and they grab and sweep the water, and anything inside gets crushed and pulled to their mouth. And you can see in the center of this one towards the bottom, all of that orange in its stomach is all of the brine shrimp that it's recently eaten, which is pretty cool. You can also see in this video their gill structures on those back paddles there. And then nudibranchs, a lot of people love them, but they're literally everywhere, and they leave their eggs everywhere too. At this top right corner, you can see these are barnacle-eating nudibranchs, and all of their eggs that they have, they can lay thousands of eggs in just one ribbon. And those will hatch out and become small little plankton that will hopefully grow up to these sea slugs. So super cool animal that I highly encourage everybody to look into, because nudibranchs are one of my favorite. And if you're a nudibranch enthusiast, stop by the Mass Center Aquarium, because we've got a bunch in our tank that naturally recruit, that come in seasonally. So, stop in the spring, summer, winter, fall, you're going to see a different nudibranch every time. All right, number 6, moon snail. These are also one of my favorite. Every time I go to the beach, I try to find some sign of them. These are marine snails that get to the size of a dinner plate. They are massive. They're also super cool with a supernatural power. One is they can scale walls like Spider-Man. So you can see my hand here on the left side and how big they are, but also their ability to just suction cup that giant foot and slowly crawl up surfaces. Also, you can see in this top middle photo here, they slime everywhere. You can find where they've gone by their slime trail. Unfortunately, these victims are sand dollars that kind of got mowed over by the snail, but that mucus helps protect the foot as it goes over debris and harder surfaces, but also protects the outer flesh of the moon snail, because you can see in this bottom left or right hand corner here, the flesh will actually envelop the outside of the snail shell. And then when they're threatened or scared or something's trying to eat it, they will actually push all of the water out of their body, squeezing it out like a sponge, and then the whole animal will fit back inside that shell. So while the body is outside of the shell, the mucus helps protect it. Another thing it uses its mucus for is reproduction. So in the top right photo and this middle photo is a moon snail making an egg collar. So what they do is they secrete a layer of mucus, so snot, lay a layer of eggs, and then another layer of snot. And that snot brings in that sand that adds like this barrier protection to it. So basically it's laying its eggs or potential offspring in a bunch of snot and sand. So they're kind of gross a little bit, but one of their really cool powers that they have is their spit or saliva has hydrochloric acid in it. And that's because these animals are eating bivalves just like sea stars are, but they don't have those strong 2 hands, 5 arms, or 40 arms to pull those animals apart. They have to spit on that shell, and then they use a radula like the chitin, so that rasping tongue, to kind of screw that tongue into the shell of that mollusk. So the acid is breaking the shell down as they're using their corkscrew-like tongue to screw into the shell to then get inside and then liquefy the animal, where it'll pop open and it can finally consume that animal. So really cool, supernatural behavior of spitting hydrochloric acid and then having that corkscrew tongue to get to that food source. Besides, being covered in slime and climbing up walls. All right, number 5 is sea cucumbers. Sea cucumbers, just like sea stars, come in a variety of shapes and sizes because they're cousins. They're all echinoderms, which means spiky skin. And so we're going to talk about some of their cool features, but on this first slide, we've got armored sea cucumbers, which have this, or creeping petal, if you call them that, have these petal-like structures on the outside that protect them and can actually adhere them down to hard surfaces so that animals can't get to them. The one in the center here is a orange or red cucumber, and they hide underneath rocks or sediment and then use their branching tentacles to feed. So usually don't see them unless they are eating. And then what most people think as a cucumber is this bottom one, and this one is a California sea cucumber. Not a slug, it's not a mollusk, it's an echinoderm, so related to sea stars, sand dollars, and sea urchins. And these ones pretend to be spiky like their cousins. However, that's just a costume they're wearing. It's very jello-like to the touch. So cucumbers can also get really, really big. You can see this one is almost as big as my whole arm. And that's a California sea cucumber. They're the ones that get pretty massive around here. And with that, they are constantly feeding. And so you can see its happy little mouth here with a little bit of food in its mouth. And so it basically plays patty cake all day long, picking up algae. And one of the really cool things that I like to talk to people is about is that these animals are cleaning our environment for us. And they're kind of just like that Roomba, picking up everything, eating that detritus, which is dead organic matter, and recycling it. And recycling it into clean sand for us, which area of sea cucumbers, so let's pick Redondo Beach here. All of the sea cucumbers in this area will poop 3 Eiffel Towers worth of poop in 1 year. So imagine if these animals weren't here and they weren't able to clean that area, our beaches and our local environments would be not as clean and not as good because of these amazing detritivores that clean it for us. However, sometimes they can get a little gross themselves. So if you can see this cucumber on the right side here, it had a run-in with a sea anemone, which tried to digest it. However, this cucumber got out and it will regrow its skin. They have regenerative powers just like their cousins, the sea stars, where they will regrow that outer skin and be good as new. And as I talked about, they have those cool spikes on the outside of their bodies. If something tries to, pull them off, eat them, they can regrow those back. But with California sea cucumbers, they do a really cool defense strategy where if I were to touch them or try to pick them up, they would release their muscles and their water and kind of just string being into that predator's hand or mouth, which in the natural environment, if something dies as you're trying to eat it, means, oh my gosh, it might have a disease. I don't want to eat it. So that predator will then drop it. And then they'll suck water back up and start moving right back along. So basically protecting itself by playing possum. And if that doesn't work, if you look at this bottom left-hand corner and you can see the end of the sea cucumber down here, that is not worms, that's its internal guts. And so these animals will actually spew out through their back end all of their guts on the inside, one, to scare that animal, because I'm pretty sure I would be scared if I was trying to eat this and then all of its guts came flying out. But also as like a distraction, they're very sticky, so it can, sort of blind and distract that animal. And that animal can then eat those guts as the rest of the sea cucumber runs away. So this animal can live without its gut system and then regrow them back to survive. So it's beneficial because it's just missing a part of its body rather than being eaten by something. So it'll have to lay low for a little while it regrows those guts. But yes, super gross defense mechanism to basically leave your guts behind. All right, number 4, jellies. Jellies are pretty cool. Most people are really scared of jellies because one, they sting. They're Nigeria. They have stinging cells. But they're super cool when you start to learn about their anatomy that is very different from us. I put a zombie on this slide because they don't have a brain, just like our jellyfish. But when we compare anatomy to animals, we usually compare it to humans ourselves. These animals have a whole different setup that they can live, that, they don't have eyes, they don't have brains, they don't have nose, but they can still find food. And so in these photos, we've got a moon jelly, we've got a lion's mane, which get up to 3 meters across, which 9 to 10 feet, huge. And then we've got an egg yolk jelly here because it kind of looks like a cracked egg in the water. So with jellies, they are one of the largest plankton in the world. So plankton just means they get wandered around, they get pushed with the water, they drift around. They can't really swim against the current. You can see in this video though that they are pulsing, so they can move slightly. They also do this to like get food and move it towards them. But if a big wave came through, they get pushed with that wave. This form is called their Medusa form, which I find very fitting for Halloween. And so their internal organs are that internal structure piece to them. And in there, they've got their digestive system and their gonads. So you can see in our moon jellies, they've got the 4-leaf clover there. If you come to the Mass Center after we've fed them brine shrimp, you'll see their internal structures become bright orange because of the brine shrimp. But you can also see their little tentacles on the outside there. Some jelly tentacles are really small and fine and hair-like these ones are. Some are really long or spiraled or thick. And on those tentacles are the cnidocytes, so the stinging cells that these animals use to paralyze their food so that they can bring it into their mouth. Because, they're really soft. They're like 95% water themselves. So they can't fight against animals. So they need to paralyze it so they can eat it. And so With these ones, if you were to touch them, they would try to sting you. If you touch a lion's mane's, tentacles, you're definitely going to get stung. Some of them, their venom and their cnidocytes are a little bit stronger than others. But with this, their tentacles can sting you if they are alive, dead, or detached, because those cnidocytes are pressure sensors. So you have to touch them to release that barb that then injects that venom into you. And so, again, don't touch a jelly when it's alive. Even when it's dead, it can still sting you. And then if they're in the water, just be really careful to look around to make sure none of the detached tentacles are floating through, because I can tell you from experience, it definitely hurts when you get stung by a detached tentacle. So pretty cool. These animals are kind of like zombies, no brains, no eyes. There's also the immortal jellyfish that, comes back from the dead, but really cool creatures. All right, number 3, we're getting into the worms. Most people already think worms are gross, but marine worms are so cool. Especially our pile worms, which is the center one here that one of our interpreters has in 2 hands. They get massive, or they come in beautiful colors and shapes, like our calcareous tube worms and our feather duster worms. And with these worms, they're related to our earthworms. And we'll get into their anatomy here because they each have just these really cool, unique characteristics. So this little video here is a pile worm, which is the one that you saw in the interpreter's hands. The biggest one that I have caught is 22 inches, so almost 2 feet long. Super cool animals. You can see that it's swimming because it's using parapodia, which are the bristles on the outside of its body. If you didn't know, worms actually have hair. That's how worms on land move around, is by digging through the sediment with the hairs on the outside of their body. These ones have moved into kind of like a paddle-like structure, which parapoda means false legs or false paddles. And so they can swim with those. And so you can see it in this video here, moving in circles by kind of doing the wiggle or the shake and then shaking their parapodia to swim. Otherwise, most of the time they do use those parapodia, which you can see really well in this bottom left-hand picture, for digging in that sediment and finding food. But they do come and swim towards the surface during breeding season, which, if you look in this upper right-hand corner, is what we caught in our light trap. They actually follow the moon at night to congregate to each other at the surface of the water. And so this is our slime balls that we end up with. You can see the hundreds, I think we counted up to 500 potentially out of these photos here. And so what they do is they literally just squeeze each other until gametes are released, and then the gametes mix and then become plankton, settle out into the sediment, which then they grow up into these worms that we see. But their faces are super cute. You can see here at the bottom, they do have kind of like these feeling tentacles or barbs on the front of their face that help them feel. And then they do have these sharp little talon-like structures on the inside of their mouth, because they use a proboscis to feed. You've probably heard the word proboscis when it comes to butterflies. So it's a retractable feeding mouth that will come out. This one shoots out, grabs the prey with its little talons, and then forces that food down its throat. So a little scary. Also, if you know the movie Tremors with Kevin Bacon, these were like the inspiration for those giant sandworms. And then at the top here is one of our calcareous tube worms. We also have feather dusted worms. So the calcareous ones, their saliva is mixed with a calcium. So they make their entire outside tubing out of calcium. Whereas our feather dusters are making it out of a leathery protein that's in their saliva mixed with sand. But they both use these really cool radials, which is their feeding structure, but also their eyes. So if you look at this very colorful plumage at the top, those feather structures are grabbing plankton out of the water and then bringing it down to its mouth. But on those radials are eye spots all the way down. So technically they're eating with their eyelashes. So imagine trying to eat cheeseburgers with your eyelash. All right. Number 2 is a lamprey. these animals are so cool. We've only caught them 3 times here with our light trap. They're pretty elusive in the Puget Sound. Not much is really known about their distribution or how many there are. And so these ones here are more estuarine, so we're freshwater and saltwater. So intertidal zone, we're able to find them. There are lamprey that are the deep dwelling ones, and then there are freshwater ones, which the freshwater lamprey use their mouth to climb up waterfalls as they migrate, which was amazing. So one of their supernatural powers that they have is they've got this cookie cutter like jaw. Again, fuel for nightmares later. So this jaw is used for kind of latching onto fish and sucking out nutrients and grabbing food and then moving on to the next victim. You can see them down here looking just like an eel. So these little pore structures on the side is their gills, how they breathe. And so they swim around until they can find food, latch on, eat off the host, and then move on to their next host. And then, like I was saying earlier, some will migrate into fresh water where they'll spawn, and they'll use that oral disc or their mouth to literally climb up rocks, which is also really cool. So if you've heard of like the cookie cutter shark, these are the cookie cutter eels of Puget Sound. All right, and number 1, super cool animal that we have here at the Mass Center Aquarium is the hagfish. I didn't know a lot about these animals until we ended up getting one here at the aquarium. And now that we have one and I have studied them a little bit, I am obsessed with ours. So if you look at this upper right picture, you can see these little barbules that are sticking on the outside. These help it sense things because it doesn't have eyes. It has eye spots. These animals have been around for 300 million years with evolving very little. It's the perfect life form, if you will. But if you see this little white spot on the back, that's its eye spot. So they see light and dark. So if you were to close your eyes, look at a light source, wave your hand in between your eyes and that light source, you can see that movement. That's how they see. So they have to rely on other senses by like using their barbules, but also this giant opening here is not their mouth. Trust me, I thought it was their mouth too. It is not, it's their nose. So that's how they're sensing out there. And what they're sensing is carcasses, because these are the animals that you find on whale falls or other dead animals in Puget Sound. So they're helping to clean up, the circle of life that is happening in Puget Sound. And so let's get to some really cool pictures here. So here is the big hagfish itself. Ours is a little over a foot, almost 2 feet long. So this here is the nose. The barbules are their sensing. We've got our eye spots towards the back, but its mouth is at the bottom underneath. So like where the chin is. And these animals don't have a jaw and teeth. They have keratin plates. So keratin is what your fingernails and hair is made out of. So they've got 5 nails, if you will, that mash and grab their food. So they're eating dead and decaying things, which are already starting to break down. So they don't really need that teeth to pull apart. So they just, that mouth, jaw area flares out, grabs that food and pulls it back in. If you've ever watched them feed, it is a thing to see. But they're super cool and very useful for our environment as those detritivores and those scavengers. And so you can see these small holes that run down the side of their body. You can see them really well at the top here. Hagfish are super soft, and so there's a lot of animals that might potentially be able to eat them. And to counteract that as a defense mechanism, they ooze slime. Way more slime than a slime star does. These ones instantaneously can make 6 gallons of slime. And this slime wraps and expands. So if something tries to eat it, they literally get choked, especially if it's a fish, gets stuck in their gills and they end up dying while the hagfish survives because of that slime that is in their mouth. And that slime is held within their body. If you can believe it or not, they're not that big. And that's because they are using fine threads that are made out of like a silk protein They're actually trying to see if they can make clothes out of this. And so those silk proteins are super, super tiny, and they're coiled up inside those holes there. And then wrapped around those are a small amount of mucus. And so when those strands push out of their body, that mucus is basically spread out really thin, causing like a mucus bubble, if you will, that then soaks in salt water. So their mucus is 99% salt water and just a small portion of them. And that's how they can make 6 gallons of slime instantaneously by still being so small and not having to use a lot of their energy and resources in order to protect themselves. And so there was, oh gosh, I can't remember what state, but there was videos of these hagfish that got spilled on an interstate because we do use them for food, but also they're looking at the proteins for making things out of them. And these hagfish spilled out on the highway, and cars are in 2 feet deep of slime on the interstate and are unable to move because of how strong and sticky their slime is. So that is why hagfish are at the top of my creepy crawlies of the Salish Sea, because they're super cool and unique and they don't get enough love. But if you do want to see one, we have one here at the Mass Center Aquarium and currently on display, and on our YouTube channel is one eating if you really want to see it eat. But that is my top 10 creepy crawlies of the Salish Sea. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat box. And thanks for listening to all my supernatural friends that we have here at the Mass Center Aquarium.
That was great, Aeriel. So many crazy animals that we have here in the Salish Sea. I have a couple questions, and if anyone watching has any questions, please leave them in the chat, and we will get those answered for you. So my first question, we'll start at number 10 with the crabs. So if you have crabs molt and they shed their exoskeleton. If I am walking on the beach and I find what looks to be a dead crab, how do I know that it's a dead crab? How am I completely sure, or could it be a molt?
Yeah. So we get a lot of people who will see molts because crabs usually shed during breeding season when they're more in the intertidal zone. So they tend to wash up a little bit more during the springtime. And so you'll smell them. We've had kids bring in dead crabs, and I know that they're dead before they cross our door because of the smell. They decay really, really fast. Also, dead crabs tend to keep their color a little bit more. They don't bleach as fast in the sun. Also, you'll see their eyes inside their capsules, if you will, because even their eyes, they have that exoskeleton that sheds. So you'll see the eyes inside that exoskeleton still. But one kind of true and try way is pull up that back carapace on the backside of that crab. And if it pulls up cleanly and you just see the gills on the inside, then it's a crab molt. But if it doesn't open, or if it opens and then you see black goo on the inside, you're definitely holding a dead crab. But crab molts tend to be more bleached in color or different color from when they're alive, and you won't see their eyes in the eye capsule.
Awesome. That's good to know. The smell, I feel like, is probably a good trigger for most people.
Yes.
That's awesome. The chitons with the metal on their teeth is so cool. This is more of a comment than a question, but it just seems like they're wearing braces. I feel like a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, that's a good equation because they're not the full teeth. Most people think the full teeth are metal, but it's really where the teeth meet the gums. It holds them in. And if you've ever seen chitin teeth, they're like these cool little hook things. So it's almost like Captain Hook's hook, but instead of the hook being, solid, it's the stump, I guess.
Crazy. Very cool. So you talked about nudibranchs, and sea slugs are super cool. Besides seeing them in an aquarium like the Mass Center, what are some of your tips to finding them tide pooling on the beach?
Ooh, yes. So if you're on the beach with the melobes, which are hooded nudibranchs or lion's mane nudibranchs, They are going to smell like watermelon in the water. I swear, every time I go to Seahurst Beach and Burien, I'm walking at low tide and I can smell watermelon candy. It's not like watermelon, the fruit, but more of like a Jolly Rancher smell. And every single time I'm there, I'm smelling it. So look in kind of the eelgrass area because that's where they're going to hold on to things. Otherwise, they get swept. So look for that vegetation. Try to smell for them if you can. So that would be, mellobees with like opalescents and shaggies and some of our smaller species that are going to be eating anemones if you go to the docks and you do dock fouling. So belly biology is really fun. So go find a dock, lay down and look on the edge of the dock, and you can usually find them crawling after and trying to find anemones to eat. You can also find like sea lemons doing that because they're trying to eat sponges, but you can really find those in the rocky tidal zone more. Same with leopardords, they like more of the rocky tidal zone. But kind of anywhere you go, you just have to walk really slow and take your time. And more likely you're going to find a nudibranch somewhere.
Awesome. That is great. You touched on this a little bit with both sea stars and sea cucumbers, but if they're both in the spiny skinned group, are all sea cucumbers spiny? Do they feel spiny?
No. So cucumbers try to look big, bad, and scary. That's why they use those, bright red, flashy colors. Say, don't touch me. Some don't have those external spines on them. We've got one that looks like a siphon in our tanks that is speckled in color and is kind of ghostly with it being kind of a white translucent to it. And all you see is this little feeding tentacles bringing in sand, and it's really smooth. So some don't have any of that outward showing. It's usually the ones that are going to be out of the sand or out of hiding places like the California sea cucumber. They're trying to look scary because they are soft and fleshy and they don't want things to eat them.
Definitely. And they don't produce slime like a hagfish, so
Yeah,
not
yeah. I
able to
don't think
scare
they've
things away.
managed that yet. Yeah.
Not
They're
yet,
just going to
anyway.
regrow like their body, but yeah.
Exactly. So my last question is, are so polychaete worms have little proboscis and little
Mhm.
barbs, and they do tend to come up into the water column to spawn. Are they dangerous for people, whether that's on the docks or diving?
Yeah, so they do have a venom. So venom needs to be like injected. And so on those little like teeth like talon structures, if they were to bite you, it could definitely hurt and sting. If anybody's ever played with bloodworms before, they're used as like a bait around here. They also have that proboscis with the barb, so they can actually bite onto you. So yeah, they're somewhat dangerous. They're not going to kill you. They're not going to, they're definitely like not the Tremors and Kevin Bacon where they're going to just take you down whole. But they do have defense mechanisms to try to make sure predators, aka humans, don't eat them or take them. Another thing, you don't want to handle them because they are segmented worms. They can literally cut themselves in half or self amputate. And so then you're kind of left holding this gross half worm. And because they are segmented, they have all of the organs that they need in each segment, which allows them to do that self amputation to save themselves. So in order not to hurt the worm and not to get hurt, kind of watch from a distance. With us, we get them in our traps all the time, so we have to handle them. But if you're out there, just, watch from afar, see them swimming in the water, which is really cool. They look like little dragons swimming. But yeah, they can hurt us and we can hurt them.
Definitely. That's good to know. So I don't see any questions currently in the chat. It's anyone watching, you're welcome to put them in there. But you've mentioned a couple times our crab trap. If you want to talk a little bit about that, since we've got the time, that some of these animals are found in the crab trap. So
Yeah, even our lamprey came into our light trap, which was a shock. I have to say, the first time we caught one. Usually it's like the giant worms. And so my intern came running down and she was like, it's like a long fish, it's not a worm. And I was like, maybe it's a blenny, like a pinpoint gunnel or something. And I get there and I started screaming. She thought, something was happening. And I was like, this is a lamprey. This is super cool find. And so with our light trap, we have a mechanism that we built based off of Pacific Northwest Crab Research Group's protocol that we're a part of, where these animals are attracted to our light source, which goes on 30 minutes before dusk and turns off 30 minutes after dawn. So it's mimicking the moonlight cycle that they use to travel to the surface of the water, because the largest migration in the entire world happens in Puget Sound and the oceans every single night as zooplankton, which are animal plankton, start off in the cooler waters down below and migrate to the surface of the water where they're eating the phytoplankton that has been photosynthesizing in the sun. And so by putting that light source in, they go to that light source, get put in the trap that we then pull out and try to, one, identify the different species to see what the biodiversity is in Puget Sound, and then count all of them to see the quantity of those species. And then from there, we can look at seasonality shifts, and some other organizations are looking at what the changes for ocean acidification are happening, whether it's pH or temperature rise. Where here we're looking at temperature, saltwater intrusion, and tidal changes on the crabs around here. So first and foremost, we do it for crabs, but around here at Mass Center, we are in love with all the weird, wacky, creepy crawlies. So we look at everything. So we've caught lamprey, pile worms. Oh my gosh, last year was just worms galore. Amphipons. We've got octopus in there before. Snailfish. We get a lot of different types of fish. Usually they tend to be smaller because the holes are small on our trap. But we've got salmon in there. We get bay pipefish, three-spined sticklebacks in there, but usually tiny little things that are in the water. And then all of that information helps with fisheries managers to predict harvest numbers up to 4 years in advance for Dungeness crab species around here.
Very cool. That's awesome. And are you currently looking for volunteers for this program?
Yes, we are looking for volunteers for our light trap because at our location, we are doing it year round to look at seasonality. So we pull light trap Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 9:30 to 11:30. Sometimes it goes a little bit longer depending on how big the sample is or if we get some cool stuff in there. And so we are looking at volunteers, no experience necessary. If you do have experience, all the better. But if you don't, we will train you how to use microscopes, how to sort the sample, and then how to identify those animals and then how to count them. Because sometimes we have to subsample, but then adds in math and equations. So we'll teach you everything you really need to process those samples. And then besides light trap, we also use volunteers all the time here at the Mass Center Aquarium. As you know, Emily, we've got our life support team volunteers where they can learn how to take care of these creepy crawlies of the Salish Sea. We've got our education and outreach team that helps us build empathy for these animals that most people, go towards the charismatic megafauna like orcas and harbor seals and all of that, which I also love. But we also want to build that empathy so that we can serve the rest of the environment, even if they do look creepy and unusual. So we've got lots of different opportunities here. And so if anybody does want to volunteer, you can go to our website, mass.highline.edu, click on that volunteer tab. It'll talk about some of our volunteer teams that we have, also when they're usually scheduled. And then if you are 10 to 13-year-olds, we have to have you volunteer with a parent or guardian. If you're 14 and up, you can volunteer by yourself. And we ask that you just volunteer once a month with us. And then to get started, you fill in a volunteer application, attend a volunteer orientation, and then you're well on your way to learning all about these creepy crawly animals.
Awesome. Well, that is great. And we are just about at our 4:30 stop time. So thank you, Aeriel, so much for showing us all of the wondrous, interesting things about these creepy crawlies of the Salish Sea. Is there anything you would like to promote before we sign off?
Yes. So I would like to say, come down to the Mass Center. We're open Saturdays 10 to 2 every weekend except for the winter holidays. And because it's October, we do Fear on the Pier. here at the Mass Center where we decorate, we bring out all of our parasites in a jars, we bring all of our skeletons, more than what's hanging in the ceiling, out where you can actually interact with those bones. And then we have a graveyard this year that is buried marine mammals from our stranding network. And so you can learn about how those animals died. Most of them are based off of human impacts and the ways that we can change our behavior so that we can conserve those animals. So it is a spooky, fun holiday with a little bit of education added into it. And so Fear on the Pier is October 26th from 10 to 2, and we're free. If you dress up in costume, which we encourage because we will also be dressed in costume, you might get a spooky little treat.
There you go. All right. Well, we will see you all next week or next month for Science on the Sound in November. And yeah, have a good afternoon, everybody.